Vonnie Herrera with us this morning, Think 3D. You know, we haven't been on in a while, and you always provide some things that are transparent and also diverse in the show. And I hate using those words, but I'll use them with you because you got to take us a different direction. I know you've been working on leadership development, and we'll get to that in a second. But, you know, we're now just a week away from the Sioux Falls election. We're a little further away for the state election.
Yeah.
And I want you to kind of maybe point out from what you see what we've missed in the Sioux Falls city election.
Well, and you know, in our mayoral race, it's a little bit different. You know, there have been a lot of forums and things of that nature. I think the thing that people have probably been yearning for is really getting down into the depths of things, not necessarily press releases and not necessarily 90-second answers, but really giving a person an idea of what it's going to look like when that person is physically mayor. How are you going to be able to communicate and interact with those folks, whoever it may be. And I think you have to create those opportunities to be able to do that. You really got to put yourself in those spaces. So I think there's always more opportunity for that. I think we get into these kind of string of forums where you know, there's 4 or 5 people up on the stage, 6 in this case for most of the campaign, and you're giving 90-second answers with no rebuttal. I think sitting down and really engaging with people, thinking through ideas is something that is really valuable that I think we could have seen a little bit more of.
How did the outsiders beat the insiders?
Well, I think aligning outsiders, first of all, I think there's more outsiders than what people realize. I think a lot of people feel that way. Number one, I think if anything that we have learned in the last probably 10 years, particularly from young people, is that we don't necessarily want everything run by insiders. That's almost works against you in a lot of cases. If you're able to communicate a message, that's important for people.
You and I both work with political candidates, and we have for a number of years. But sometimes they don't quite know how to grab the audience.
Right.
Because there's so much out there. There's social media, there's television, there's radio, there's print.
Right.
How do you grab something and not overdo it?
I mean, that's a fine line to walk, you know, because it's in the eye of the beholder, right? And so you could say something that you think is in the ballpark and, you know, you might be throwing a strike, right? And so it really just depends on what the situation is. But what I would tell you is that people want genuine interaction. Again, that's one of the things that we've learned. People want genuine over something that they feel like is polished and nuanced. But at the same time, you want somebody that's thinking through what they're saying and thinking through what it is that they're doing. So what I would tell people is the truth doesn't have a sound, right? And at the end of the day, if you really honest to goodness, feel like what you're saying is for the betterment of the people, and if you really feel like people need to understand or know something, that's the type of candor that you have to be able to provide. Because if people don't want you doing the right things, they don't want you. So the reality of it is you can't get yourself elected doing the wrong things. You just can't. It's untenable and it's going to backfire you on at some point. So basically people have to be willing to lose. You have to be open to it.
You and I have both seen you can have the best message in the world, but if you don't get your voters out, you lose. And you had a lot of people that were surprised that didn't go to the polls on April the 10th.
Right. I think we're going to see that again. Because we always have, low turnout. That energy is really high. But I think the key to that in all levels of politics is we tend to get into a politics of voting against versus voting for, right? And we tend to get in a situation where somebody is saying, well, vote against that candidate because of these shortcomings. But we rarely have a situation where somebody's saying, vote for me because of my vision, vote for me because of my passion, vote for me because I will fight for people in the way that I think, not necessarily what I think. Because the thing about it is that I can vote for somebody that I don't necessarily align on all of the issues if I respect and appreciate how that person makes decisions. Because they're not always going to be about me. But if that person makes good decisions, I know I will still benefit from it, whether it be now or in the future.
In Sioux Falls and a lot of the municipalities, school boards, we're seeing that people are listening, but are they really understanding what the statewide candidates are saying?
Yeah. Well, statewide is always a trick. There's always a lot of things happening there. And we have a very interesting dynamic, right, where the majority of the population is really in 2 cities, but the majority of the legislative representation is in between those cities, right? Quite a bit of our wealth in the state is in between those cities. And so that creates an interesting dynamic where the representation is not necessarily based on population. And so I think what happens is that people tend to only think about their individual constituencies and where they're at. And I think that makes it difficult given our makeup. And I think us city slickers have to give some thought to the rural communities and how things are happening out there and what affects them, so that they can vote for somebody and know that that person is representing their interest. And I think people who are in those rural communities can need to think about what's happening in our cities, in our schools, and understand that it's the greater good. And so when we start getting that cross thought, where we're thinking about people outside of our immediate area, I think it'll be easier for people to vote outside of their specific interest or people in their specific area.
Vaney Herrera, Think-3D. You're working leadership programs and you have some goals.
Yeah, it's big. One of the things that we were doing, we went out and we said, how do we change the dynamic of this? How do we change the platform of business, of our politics, of our community? A lot of times when you sit on the board, you look up and you see the same people doing the work. You see the same business leaders. You see the same people. This city is effectively run by less than 100 people, right? It's not a ton of people who really determine what happens in the city. And so when you look up and you say, what would happen if we really engaged our young people? What would happen if we created that apprenticeship and that connection between all of our generations? And what would happen if we had more than just these handful of people making these decisions? So we went about the business of acquiring a grant and some various other things that we were doing to put together a leadership development program, partnering with some businesses like Smithfields, like First Premier, like Grand Prairie Foods, particularly those who engage with all types of the community. And we said, can we put 500 leaders into the community by 2025? And that is our goal, at 25 to 30 people at a time. Our larger goal is to get a static location and be able to create a leadership academy for the city so that we can produce leaders with the skills to be able to lead our community into the future. And if we can put 500 folks into our community by 2025, when we have the convergence of this new workforce and all of these things happening in tech, I think we can take a quantum leap as a city and as a state.
Let's talk age group.
Yes, sir.
Because I'm not sure that everybody is connecting in some areas. 39, 40-year-old candidates running.
Yeah.
We have said for years in this city and every city you and I have been in, we've got to get our young people involved. Young people are now involved. What about those people that have been there, done that?
Well, and that's just the thing. You've been there, done that. That means you have the experience. But a lot of times that can also mean that you're tired. It can mean that you're jaded.
Well, it means they're not talking to you, too.
Right. It can mean all of those different things. And it's not enough just to say we're all in it together, right? That's a nice, happy feeling type of thing. It's important for our leaders and it's important for our candidates and all those people to be able to explain the connectivity of how what you do affects what I do, right? As much as we want people to do the right thing just because it's the right thing, sometimes you got to make a case. You should always be prepared to make a case. And so we should be able to say this benefits me because it benefits you. When you're talking about almost a third of our population is going to be retiring approximately at the same time, okay? And most have not saved in the way that they perhaps should have and are not going to have the resources. So now we're having people who are having to work into their 70s and 80s because Social Security is not cutting it. Do we really want our young people to be unsuccessful? Do we really want them to not have the tools to be able to create industries, to be able to create the type of wealth and growth that can help subsidize all of our people who built this country for the last 50 years? I think not. At the same time, do we want to leave all of that knowledge and information from all of those people that have the keys and the infrastructure, like your Rotaries, like your chambers, like all of those type of things where people have infrastructure that young people can draw off of to make change faster? It doesn't make sense, right? And so if we can make logical connections to why people should engage with each other, I believe that they will.
My suggestion today is do less spinning and pivoting and be more believable. Does that work?
Right. And you know the key to being believable is telling the truth.
Duh.
Right.
Any age.
Right. But for so many people, believability and being genuine is a tactic. You are what you are. And the only thing that a man or a woman should ever want to be is everything that they say they are.
Vaney Herrera, appreciate the visit. We'll talk again soon.
Appreciate you always.